Hello everyone and welcome to the 20th Masterclass with the MET Orchestra Musicians at Lessonface, featuring Concertmaster David Chan. I'm Katie Falk-Flores here with Lessonface, where we connect students with great teachers for live lessons and classes. In this Masterclass today, we will have 3 student performances and coaching sessions, followed by a brief Q&A at the end, so please enter any questions in the chat box if you have them, and we will address them after the performances. That being said, and now David Chan, concertmaster of the MET Orchestra, will coach June Lee of Towson, Maryland, who will play orchestral excerpts by Brahms, Mendelssohn, Beethoven, and Mozart.
Great, bravo. It's not easy to go first, and it's not easy to do excerpts first, but everything's very well prepared, very well played. I'm going to talk about slightly different issues with each one, but just this being a masterclass setting rather than a, like an individual lesson, trying to draw a common thread for the benefit of our audience. I think anytime you play excerpts, there's a tension between correctness and then the other virtues we want to express as a musician. And there's a place for correctness. There's a reason why when a listening panel or committee asks for these standard excerpts, there's something they're looking for that's difficult to produce. And I think in the case of the Mendelssohn and the Mozart, it's quite obvious what those sorts of things are. On the other hand, an excerpt like the Brahms, it's quite demanding in terms of being able to play accurately, in terms of like intonation, and to have a beautiful sound without, not scratching. But I think also an excerpt like this, it really asks for the candidate to show what they have in terms of passion. And I think it'll be interesting to see how auditions evolve after this year we've been through. Because I know for me, after a year without much live music, I'm not craving for music just to be clean and correct, but to really inspire. So you played the Brahms, starting at the beginning, you played the Brahms very, very well. For me, it was a little too correct, if you know what I mean. It was conservative in terms of the way you used the bow, in the way you moved through the phrases. So I'm exaggerating, of course, but a little feeling of like like making sure like they all fit in the groove. But I think you can do that and let go much more. So it has this driving passion. It doesn't mean that it rushes. It's not any faster. It just, you let go more. And, dum, ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. It's not just, right? It's not just by the book, but it has this sweep that makes the listener excited. So even in an audition, we have to have that, because the finalists are all going to play it very well and very correctly. So if you have three people like that in the finals, and one really just sweeps you away with the passion of their playing also, that person is obviously going to have an advantage. I know you hear about people who take the opposite viewpoint, that just to be correct, but I don't know. I want to hear some music. So just I know you know how it's supposed to go. So just go for it a little bit more. Let's play the Brahms again. Okay, great. That's so much better. I have two small suggestions for you. The double notes, try not to think of them as duple notes. I find that, anytime you have double notes or quadruple notes, that can be the bane of phrasing, because then what happens is we focus on playing each note twice. Right at the beginning of the Prokofiev classical is another classic. Like trying to daka daka daka. So I would rather you think of it like a phrase, something that's going like this, where each note happens to have two articulations or pulsations. So they might not be as perfectly even in terms of every note being the same, but they're even enough in terms of every note change coming at the right time. But it's not the same as producing in these, I guess we have an eighth rest, so 30 identical notes over 2 bars. That doesn't help us. We just need everything to stay in time, but the notes themselves can be more purposefully driven to the top. Yes, yes. Okay, great. Wonderful. It's transformed, really. The only thing I would add is the first eighth after the dotted quarter, make sure it has enough bow and enough tone. But that's it. I'm going to skip to the next excerpt just so that we have enough time to talk about things. But that's so much better. Now the Mendelssohn, on the other hand, this has to be more correct. There's a reason why we ask for this on auditions. It's very hard to play evenly. So you're actually adding time in every bar. So you have like a big gap and then you kind of rush, but you don't quite make it always. And some of the bars like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Now it doesn't have to be 100% metronomic, but it has to be close enough. Meaning it doesn't have to be, but it should also not be, it should be, so it should be yet da 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 da, not da 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 da, but yet da 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 da, 1, 2, 3. It has to just, we have to feel the integrity of the bar. There's always somebody playing 16th notes, so we cannot afford to get too far off the track. Okay, good. That's better. So a piece of advice I would give you for practicing this is Midsummer Night's Dream, right? Midnight, soft, whispering, whatever. So if you only practice soft and small, you can very easily get yourself to a place where you can't play much at all. You know what I mean? It's like the control, you start to lose the edge on it, and it's hard to make differences. So what I like to do is kind of zoom in on it, you know, in our mobile world. Think of like pinch out or whatever. So play, like think mezzo forte and make everything, all the expressive nuances bigger than they'll actually be. So something like this. So we can really hear the shape. Very even, like we discussed, but with a lot more shape than we'll actually hear in the final product. Try that once. Okay, good. Now try to do exactly the same, but just reduced scale. A little softer, everything a little bit smaller, but all the same expressions, all the same nuances that you did just now. Okay, good. Do you feel like you have I have a little bit of zoom lag that time, but did you feel like you have a little bit more control than before?
Hmm. More comfortable.
Right.
More
Yeah,
comfortable.
it's because when you practice only soft, there's nothing to grasp onto.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing is when you get softer, the notes have to be shorter and lighter as well. Otherwise, there's still a little bit of heaviness in the sound, which makes it sound louder than you're actually playing.
Hmm.
Like the notes have a little bit too much length to them. So rather than, you see how there's like a little tenuto there? If we can get rid of that and, so this is something you have to work on louder also. If you do it only soft, it's very hard to control. So let's go back to mezzo forte once and be conscious of releasing notes and not sitting on them. Okay, good. Now the soft version. Yeah, very good. Very good. Much better controlled than before, and the sound is better too. In the course of working, we did get a little bit slower, but that's okay. It's the right approach. So, talking about correctness and then talking also about expression and passion, I think the Beethoven excerpt we can really combine both of these. And here's a place where correctness of rhythm and steadiness of tempo is not to be academic, but actually because the more time we have on notes, the more opportunity we have to sing them. So what do I mean by that? So if I if I let the notes run, there's actually not enough time to sing them. Whereas if in the established tempo, I can have a very flowing tempo, but if I fill all that time, it'll be more singing. But a very important thing is the first beat, and I hear this a lot. Already from the way you play that first beat, I form an idea of what your tempo is and when I expect the notes off the second beat to arrive. So it's very common to hear. You see how there's no rhythm there? I have no sense of when it's going to release. By the way you play the grace notes, I expect a tempo, and then the notes don't come. So if I'm thinking 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, you see how the note has like a certain amount of content, and then it releases at a point, and then the next note arrives when I expect it to.
Yeah.
It's not just I hold a note and then I decide to play some other time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's try that. Okay, that's really beautiful. Two things I would add: when you cross strings, it still has to be expressive. It feels a little, when you cross strings, it's slightly angular. And then if you have more than two or three notes in a row without at least some passing vibrato, it's going to sound dry, right? We don't need an overt vibrato. We're not looking for a 1950s romantic Beethoven, but it just enough to keep the sound alive. Not an obvious vibrato, but also not obvious white tones. Let's do the same amount again. Okay, good. Much better. That's beautifully even in terms of rhythm, beautifully even in terms of color. It's slightly too even in terms of expression. So, what I mean by that is if I watch your bow, it moves at roughly the same speed all the time. And while that's a good thing in terms of technique and control, in terms of expression, if we want to rise and fall, we might want to distribute our bow more along the lines of what we actually want to say. So one more time, don't let me spoon feed you what it is. Your idea of what it should say, but really let us hear that. Yeah. How did that feel?
I'll have to polish it further, but I felt more in motion.
Exactly. So you see, like, it's not any less correct than what you did before, but now I feel like I'm listening in on a portion of a performance of Beethoven 9, right? So it's like I know that taking auditions feels like taking a test, but no listener wants to feel like they're listening to a test, right? They want to hear music, and these are excerpts, meaning they're excerpts of great pieces of music. So, um, we worked together before, so you know what I mean by that. Is like there's, um, what's in all of these pieces. So apart from the Mendelssohn and the Mozart, we don't have time for now. Katie's waving a hand at me to go on to the next person, but um, it's kind of the same way we worked on the Mendelssohn. Just have to think more about articulation and work in a dynamic range where you can then scale it down. But yeah, everything is really good. You sound good. Things look good, but just make sure you deliver the music so that the listener, when you're taking an audition, they're just like, yeah, this person has it all. They play well and they know how the music is and they can communicate it. As opposed to, when you're like, well, this was good, but like the third finger and the 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 pinky on the bow, like by the time when you start to look at individual elements, something is missing. When we hear the music, then you've done it. Then we cease to nitpick individual things and we're just like, that's it. That's the sort of impression you want to deliver.
Could I ask you a quick question about secco spiccato in Mozart?
Um, sure. Tell me.
I don't know how to execute that because my spiccatos tend to be a little bit more uh I has more room to it or longer.
Mm.
When somebody tells me to have a drier spiccato, it doesn't really communicate to me in a specific way?
Because I have to go on, I can't really answer that, but the advice I would say is you have to find a way to stop the sound. It's not a question of like do this with your finger or whatever. It's like if the sound is still ringing, you need to do something different.
With a bow or?
Well, yeah, of course with the bow, you know.
Okay.
So the sound stops right away. It means it has too much length. We talked about that in the Mendelssohn. So same thing.
But still has the ring to it, right?
Depends. Can be much less.
Okay.
All right. Nice to see you.
Me too. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for playing for us, June, and thank you, David, for coaching her through that. And now in the second spot, we have David Chan, concertmaster of the MET Orchestra, who will coach Danira Rodriguez of Puerto Rico, who will play the first movement of the Violin Concerto No. 3 by Mozart.
Bravo. Thank you very much. Um, very elegantly played for the most part. A lot of positives. I was thinking about what would be the most beneficial for you. I have a couple ideas. You've probably had at least one teacher say to you that when you play Mozart, you have to know the opera, right?
Yeah.
You've heard this before.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think people say that?
Probably because it's trying to emulate, the opera singers, sopranos and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, when you listen to Mozart's music, whether it's violin or piano, like piano concerto, string quintet, clarinet music, his language really didn't change much from the vocal music to the instrumental music. For composers like Beethoven and Brahms, it's quite different, right? It's Beethoven's music, instrumental writing has this very accented and sometimes angular feature that doesn't translate to voice well at all. But Mozart's music always has this singing quality. So, thinking from that standpoint, when I look at the way you use your bow, and I had mentioned a little bit of this to June in one of her excerpts, I see that every bow stroke you use more or less the same way. Not exactly, but you tend to use the whole bow, and you tend to use the most bow at the beginning. So there's a little bit of a accent at the front and lose a little bit of sound shape to everything. Now, what's another besides a singing quality to the sound? What's another feature of opera singing or any type of singing for that matter? What's another element of that we don't have on the instrument?
I'm not quite sure what you're referring to.
When I tell you it, you're going to say, "Oh, that's so obvious." But since you don't know where I'm coming from, it's a little mysterious. But it's the text. You have
Ah,
words,
right. Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So the net effect, if okay, and forgive me, I'm going to exaggerate to make a point. But if every bow has more or less the same amount of sound and the same kind of degree of accentation at the beginning, it would be like if we were singing an opera aria and every note was the same word.
Okay. Yeah.
You see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, if you think voi che sapete, I really should not sing. I notice this being recorded, so that's not a good thing. You see, like different consonant and vowel sounds produce a different thing. So the same sort of way. So the amount of bow can have a lot to say about the amount of sound so that we don't kind of level out but have much more rise and fall. But then how we distribute it, there are times where we want to start softly. I don't mean dynamic wise. I mean texture wise, right? Rather than that's like it feels a little bit like if we were creating a text, every note begins with the same letter.
Okay.
But it could be ba, da, ka. Like it can progress through different words. So even You see, like by using a different amount of bow and thinking about how we start notes as if were text, we can create a much more varied palette. Okay, can we give that a try?
For beginning?
Yes. Good. A lot of that was much better. I just want to call your attention to a couple places where I think you can plan your bow better. So I don't remember all your bowings, but I feel that you get a little bit stuck, and then all of a sudden it's whole bow on every bow. And I think if you save it, you can build more of a shape. Yeah, very good. So you see, like, even you may not even need to make that much difference because it felt like quite a steep crescendo, and it can be more subtle than that. But the point is, never exactly the same.
Right.
Going back to the first phrase for a moment before we go on, even we have these groups of three. It might be very subtle, but not three identical strokes.
Is that better?
Oh, I see. You're doing a different bowing. That's fine, but still, don't make. If you're doing, 4 up, don't make it exactly double what the two that were down bow were. Okay, so you went more, but it could also be less. It could be just experiment with it.
Start more and then go less?
No, I mean the 4 notes up, you could use less bow.
Okay.
Yeah, so the point is not just, 2 notes is this amount of bow and 4 notes is double that. That if we do that, I mean, honestly, I don't think scientifically like that when I play. But it's just kind of an observation. Is if we do that, it means that our bow speed isn't changing. I'm always looking to go somewhere or come away from somewhere. It could be very, very subtle, as I'm saying, but you're going somewhere. You could be on your way to a place that will take a long time to get there, but never just like the same thing for very long. Okay, let's jump ahead to. Okay, question for you. This triad. What direction do you imagine it going?
I'm not quite sure because sometimes I do imagine it coming like bum, but then sometimes go up. So I think I'm trying to do up, but it's not as convincing as I thought.
Right. So I think if you sing it out loud, like with your voice, da 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 dum is the only way that makes sense. If you're singing ba da dum, it doesn't really make sense. So when you play, if you use the whole bow on the first note with a little bit of an emphasis at the beginning, we really have nowhere really good to go from there. So even though it's twice as long as the other notes, it can't quite get a whole bow, or we'll be in trouble phrasing wise. Good. So another thing you can think of is when you have this passage work, we need a little bit longer period of expressiveness before it releases. Otherwise, you see how most of the notes don't sound alive. But if we do, and it's not vibrato, it's you have to keep it in the bow.
Should I keep going?
Yes. Okay, so even on these, I feel like these two halves sound a little bit the same. Ya da 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 da. It has to have a little bit more shape. Okay, better in terms of shape, but do you want a big accent on the first note? I think it's more da da dum and not ta da dum, ya da 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 dum. Very good. So even it might not be an obvious place, but like that scale going up. If we make identical strokes, the phrase also sounds exactly the same.
Yeah, I noticed. Okay.
Yeah, very good. I love how you heard something in your own playing and you self-corrected. That's really the key for all of us for progress and improvement, is being able to self-correct in that sort of way. I need to wrap up in a couple of minutes, but so let me just kind of summarize what we did here. Like I feel that what you're doing now sounds much more. I mean, it was very fine playing before, but Now it's more communicative in a human sort of way. And what I mean by that is every note leads to something else a little bit more, rather than we hear like one thing that's pretty nice and then we hear something else that's pretty nice. But instead, it's alive all the time. And you know, that's really what it's about for me is it's not about inventing things that don't exist in order to be interesting. It's about taking what's there and just keeping it alive. If we connect one thing to the other like we're speaking, right? I mean, we've all heard good public speaking and bad public speaking. Good public speaking holds your attention, and the top level musicianship does the same thing. We're doing something that's not exaggerated for effect, but rather we're always telling a story, taking the musical argument somewhere that the listener can follow. And in technical terms, this means we have to use the bow in a way where it's not kind of the same thing stamped out of a clone again and again. Okay, so you're playing very well. Just think about how you can broaden your musical language that way.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for playing tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to me.
Yes, thank you so much, Danita. That was fantastic. Thank you for playing for us today. And now, in our third place today, we will be having David Chan, concertmaster of the MET Orchestra, coaching Kelly Cho of New York, who will play the exposition and development of the first movement of the Sibelius Violin Concerto.
Hello. Really, so well played in so many ways. Um, what I want to talk to you about has some overlap with what I said to the others, but in your case, for slightly different reasons. But I am going to talk about bow distribution again. I have sometimes contemplated when I'm teaching on Zoom doing this. Do you, do you see that? Can you guys see? I don't know. Maybe Katie can give me some indication. Do you see my name with my video muted? Instead of my name, it says bow distribution.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, I've thought about doing that and just going to sleep for the hour, and then just letting that be my lessons for the whole day, because it is really like such a powerful thing. And in your case, I'm going to be good now and be myself. But in your case, I often see that on down bows, you end up caught at the tip. So when you have like little inconsistencies of sound, especially when you have passage work or you're playing double stops or chords, I find that you're caught slightly too far up the bow, that you're in the upper half, and there's no real reason for you to need to be there so quickly. It's just kind of a habit. On the return trip coming up bow, you don't do the same thing. You tend to go more slowly and then more evenly, I should say. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is legato when you cross the string. So I'm just thinking something like. I know often we're thinking when we cross strings, we need to kind of articulate to make it clean. But there are times where sustaining the legato will actually produce the sound more evenly. So more attention to connection between notes when you have many of them on a bow, and particularly at string crossing time. Maybe we can work on some different things later, but let's start from Okay, so that one, you're already like this far up the bow. If you have more bow at the end, you can make a much more convincing crescendo to the top. Okay, so right there, you have almost no bow for that. Okay, so that is partially legato and partially the timing of the string crossing. I'm not quite sure what. Is that what you're doing? Don't let air seep into there. So even that chord at the top, you're at the upper half very, very quickly. Something like that. Something like that. Okay, so I have a question for you. I was watching you when you were playing through. Do you tend to play everything with your eyes closed?
Yes.
Okay, so I have nothing against that, but when you want to work on something that has to do with bow distribution and string crossings and that sort of thing, it's very helpful if you look at it. Right? If you make changes and adjustments in those ways and then you become very comfortable with them and you want to play with your eyes closed, fine. But I would really suggest when you're working on them, it's very helpful if you look at it, because you may think you're somewhere in the bow, but you're not exactly.
Right.
So just to have finer control over it when you're practicing, that could be very helpful. Okay, let's, before we jump to the cadenza, which is similar stuff, let's play the opening again. Okay, so this sounds really, really nice. It's very well played. If I'm going to pick one slight criticism, it's something I hear quite a lot of, is I hear you phrase, I hear it go up, I hear it come down. I hear it go up, it comes down. So if I zoom in close enough, there's always phrasing happening. There's not, what I described before to one of the others. You don't create any flat spots. That's a good thing. But on a global scale, there's a little bit of a feeling that this is the low point, this is the high point, and it always goes between the same 2 points. So on the local scale, it's wonderful and it's phrased and it's well played. But on the global scale, I look for a little bit of a longer, like a big shape, like highs and lows that begin to evolve a little bit more. So I don't know how well this will come out, but it might be something like. you see like the range of development is much bigger. And part of that counts on when we're in lower dynamics, not using quite the whole bow. Because we have long notes, we have to use most of the bow. But if we can reserve a little bit for when it needs to grow, we have many more possibilities. Okay, can we try one more time? Good, go on. Okay, good. It was much better. I only detect sometimes on the long notes when it needs to be growing, there are places where we can't avoid having to make crescendo on down bow and at the tip, where you're, again, running out a little bit, and then at the kind of last quarter of the bow, you're kind of trying to keep the sound going with vibrato. And if we can have a little bit more bow to work with, that will help also. Do it the same thing you just did with a little bit more attention, not just to the total amount of bow, but how you distribute the bow within that amount of bow. One more time the same. Good, great. Good, great. Do you feel any different?
Oh, very different.
Yeah. More control over the sound, right? Yeah.
And I definitely
So,
feel like down bow has to, it has to resist from going so fast.
right, correct. Yeah, it's, dynamics and sustaining sound on the violin are very tricky because unlike the piano, we have a very we reach the limit for how loud we can play and still make a beautiful sound very quickly. A piano can get louder and louder and louder and louder, but for the violin we reach a limit very quickly. So a lot of it is in character of sound rather than actual change of volume. But part of it is also we have to conserve our resources. If we go to fast bow or full bow too quickly, we don't really have anywhere to go. I mean, it's a fine line because if everything is too small, it's also not very satisfying. You need a certain degree of freedom of movement, but yeah, that was very nice. we have a few more minutes. Let's go to the cadenza for a moment. And so when you have the same thing as we did at the bottom of the first page, think of connecting your sound rather than every string crossing and every shift being a kind of break. Think of it as singing through a little bit more. Okay, so I thought the first two arpeggios were very good, but the third one, I think when we get to that range, it has to sing a little bit more. It feels a little bit like you're trying to get rid of those notes. Try to make them a little bit more out of them. Okay, now do all three of them in a row again. Go on. Okay, very good. Much better controlled than the first time. Let me give you one last thought for the evening. When we have... Sometimes you attack so much that it distorts the sound a little bit. Try to think of it as a very strong attack, but the purpose of attacking is to set the strings into vibration. So try to aim for the resonance of your open strings. And the attack is to get the strings vibrating. But if you attack in a way that makes the strings shut down, we end up with less rather than more sound. Yeah. You see, it's like it's so much more resonant. It's just as exciting, it's just as brilliant, but it's more ringing and not quite so clenched sounding. So I would just add that. Okay, but it was so well played. I think we're moving on to questions now, but it was great to hear you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for playing for us today, Kelly. That was fantastic. We really appreciate it. So I would like to first thank you everyone for coming out today and tuning in to participate in this masterclass, and especially to our concertmaster David Chan for the inspiring coaching today. If you do have more questions for David or any of the performers, please enter them into the chat. I would also like to take a moment to thank all of the MET Orchestra musicians who have given their time for this series to help students through these master classes, and for Garrett Fishbach for his tireless and excellent work in coordinating this, as well as a big thank you to the MET Orchestra Musicians team. With all of that being said, we have a couple of questions I would like to dive into if you have a moment. The first one being about opera audition repertoire being significantly different from a symphony audition repertoire. And what could you do, or could you give some comments on how to prepare those excerpts?
Well, I think ultimately the process is the same. You have to prepare the music, you have to internalize the music. So the difference is in the style of the pieces, and that's where listening to recordings, watching videos, looking at scores, however you prepare, um, you'll hear a different style of music. But if you think about it, within a symphonic um, orchestra audition, you're going to have wildly differing styles from Debussy La Mer to Brahms 4 to other things. So it's not really different in that regard. The process is the same. When you're playing, the listener has to be convinced that you really know what that piece is supposed to sound like. And so it's the same process of internalizing the music and preparing it.
So you've mentioned that actually quite a few times on how important the overall musicality is and differentiating each phrase to be its own thing. So would you say in that case that it's really you were talking about you're not exaggerating for the effect, but really telling a story to make the musical argument? How would you encourage students to find that performance, to be able to tell that story? Is there a way to develop those skills?
Well, obviously that's a long period of education that has to do with our mentors and teachers, colleagues that we play with that inspire us, conductors that inspire us sometimes. And, you know, it's all of these things, but I think the aspect that all of us are responsible for ourselves is you have to work on it. I think a lot of us are, and I experience this a lot with very talented students, but they tend to have the idea that, okay, that's all very nice. When I play really, really well, I'll think about it. But right now, I just want to like nail all this stuff. And it really doesn't work that way, because in musicianship, you can hear, I mean, we probably have a lot of great musicians who don't know how to play an instrument. Seriously, people who are like amateurs who listen to a lot of music and can really pinpoint the differences between a great performance and one that's just merely very good, but they don't have the capability themselves. So what separates someone who can hear it and bring it out and someone who can hear it but can't bring it out? It is technique. It really is. And so kind of hearing it but not working on it actively, you're not honing the skills that's going to take to make those ideas heard.
So that's where technique is in service to musicality. They're both very necessary, but you can't just practice the technique and lose track of your musicality.
Correct. And this is actually just a kind of a macro case of something I've often had with a discussion I've often had with students, where they come in and something falls apart in the lesson and they ask, I just don't get it. I practiced at home and it was really good slow, and then I worked it up to tempo, and then now but then when I it just falls apart. So then I'll ask, so how exactly did you practice? And they'll show me. And the slow practice is this complete zero music sort of practicing for accuracy thing. And then they play fast and they try to bring all their ideas out, and it doesn't work. And I say, you actually have never practiced in a slow tempo what you want to do. And I get a perplexed look, but I said, no, look, when your slow practice, none of your ideas were there. So you've never practiced how to get from point A to point B on the bow, just at a very fundamental level with it. You're practicing literally for digital precision. Right. Every bow the same length. But when you want to make now every bow has to be slightly different, and you never worked on that because the control is different. And so it's the same thing as to bring out your ideas, you have to be constantly trying to bring them out. I practice for accuracy also, but I know that's what I'm doing. I don't mistake that for I'm actually playing music right now. It's just like,
Mm.
like my thirds are really out of tune and I just have to fix that. But that's a dedicated goal. That's um, not to be confused with actually making music at that moment.
So then I know we have a couple other questions I want to get to, but following up on that, do you segment your practice time into a period where you're really focusing on musicality versus taking some time to work on something technical that maybe you need to do? Or do you start with larger practice goals? Are you just listening to yourself and figuring out what you want to work on?
Well, I think I probably speak for my colleagues who are full-time professionals also, is that at this point, it's kind of on a need to practice basis. So my time is limited, so I do what I need to.
Right.
So that means that if I'm feeling particularly out of shape, then I spend more time on scales, which gets me into back into shape faster. And yes, you can be playing 6 hours a day and be out of shape. Um, you can, um, but no, in order to be efficient, I try to do both at the same time. I would say for somebody who's still more in a building phase, um, where I go through things once and add a repetition of something if I feel it's a little bit weaker than the rest. For them, it might be two or three times or four times, whereas for me, it might be one or two times. And then the more repetitions you have, the more opportunity you have to change your approach on every pass through. And I did a lot of that when I was younger. Now I try to divide and conquer or combine just to be efficient with time.
Right. Right, but you're also being honest with yourself in that you know what you need to work on and you're working on it, or you know how to divide up your time, which is a challenge in itself, I think, for most of us. Speaking of time, though, I do want to get on to some of the other questions that have
Yes,
come
of
in.
course.
Any advice on how to practice up-bow staccato? Let's see, I think there's an example in there.
Um,
Yes.
yes. Okay. So I'll try to make this as quick as possible. Um, I don't like have like a natural stiff arm staccato, but I think one thing to realize is the middle of the bow is the weakest part. So you have, well, you can't see my entire bow and the hand, but at the tip, it's quite, it's basically like, it's like on the string and you're just stopping the bow. Whereas, like for me, this is like the must be avoided zone. So when I feel it start to weaken around here, I try to jump over the weakest part and get to the lower half, which is a much more finger driven and it's a little bit more off the string. So if you think of something like that, it starts kind of small and on the string. So it's hard to do it sitting in this chair. But that progression to something that's a little bit more off the string also gives it a little bit of excitement as it goes along. But you just have to experiment with your particular equipment, but find the part of your bow that's terrible for staccato and avoid that. Stay
Sounds like
above
a good
it,
piece of advice.
stay above it or get below it. But try not to play any notes because once you lose the bite, it's hard to get it back.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We have another question. What are some of the top things you wish orchestra conductors who don't play violin knew about violin?
Um, you know, I I think any decent conductor has a pretty good knowledge of how a different instrument works, how they work, hopefully, you know. Um, but I think one thing that I feel a lot of conductors could do is trust string players more with the bowings. I mean, if they're a string player, um, and I'll be fair, I have met some conductors who are not string players who have an incredibly good sense about bowings, and props to them about that. But I think that most of the greatest conductors I've played with have not really fussed about bowings. They full disclaimer, um, I conduct myself, and when I'm asked for my parts and that I've bowed, I do send them, and I'm very happy to have an orchestra start with bowings that are mine. But at the same time, if it's standard repertoire and an orchestra is used to doing certain bowings, it can be a lot more effective to ask the orchestra for what you want to hear rather than tell them what bowing you want.
Mm.
Let
So,
them, they're the pros. I don't play cello. So if I want to hear a certain something, I can tell the principal cellist I would love to hear XYZ and let them figure out if a bowing change is needed rather than dictate the bowings. Just like a very common timpanist trick is when the conductor says, "Can you play that with harder mallets?" They'll pretend to switch mallets, use the same one, and just change the sound. So I think so. It's kind of a larger answer is I think conductors in general could trust the instrumentalist to know their own instrument and describe what they want to hear rather than tell them what technique to use.
so
And
all about
in
communication.
yeah, in the case of string instruments, this often takes the form of bowings. It's I I don't have any problem as a concertmaster saying, I think we can give that to you, like with the bowing we already have. It's just if we do what you're asking, then we'll end up in the wrong part of the bow for this. But it's just it's extra words in rehearsal, and then you risk offending them. And if they didn't go there, it would just be easier.
Choose your battles then.
Yes.
Okay, and then I have a question also on actually going back to the secco spiccato. Is there anything that would you recommend in terms of stopping the string or stopping the sound in order to accommodate the secco spiccato, or is that something for another time?
Well, I don't know that we can go into it in depth, but it's just it's building on the idea of really being aware of what's coming out, like really listening to yourself. I think listening is ultimately the key. I think to Danita, I said that was great that you stopped yourself and corrected yourself. I mean, that is the key to all improvement is hearing and identifying. Um, just like you cannot play a phrase that you cannot imagine, you also can't fix a problem that you can't hear. So it's really, if people are telling you play drier and you're playing, right? So it's hard for me to describe what I'm doing over Zoom, but it's imagining that there has to be space between the notes. And there really are not that many ways to do it and still hang on to your bow for the next note, right? You could play a super short and dry note, but then you wouldn't be in position to continue. So it's basically, yeah, I mean, I kind of developed my own technique to play more secco spiccato when I heard someone when I was in my 20s, I heard somebody play like beautifully short notes with a lot of clear space between them. And then I would try to do it and I thought I was doing it. And then I would hear a recording and it was still much longer than I imagined I was doing. So it's getting your own perception of what you're doing with hearing what you're actually doing, the closer you can get those to align, the quicker you can improve.
And would you say recording is a good way to do that? Recording yourself and then listening to yourself?
Yes, but you can't do it all the time. You can't play and check after every time. The idea is that you're cultivating your live ears, which is always difficult. You can imagine how hard it is for singers who have the instrument inside their own body. They're so much more reliant on feedback of others, but that's a skill for them. And for us too, it's pretty close for us. It's right underneath our ears. But enough check in with recordings that you can correlate what you're hearing with what other people are hearing.
Perfect. Okay, I think thank you so much for your time. We have time for hopefully the last two questions quickly. Number one being, what are you using an external mic? And if so, they're very impressed by the clarity. What mic are you using?
Well, I'm using the Blue Yeti, which I know a lot of people have. It's actually, I tend to use I use the Apogee Mic Plus for most of my music. I think it has a more beautiful sound, but it's packed in my carry-on for a trip tomorrow. So the Blue Yeti, which is kind of the household external mic that everybody uses for their various things. So I'm using that tonight. But as you can tell, it's still quite good.
Thank you so much. And the last question today is there a well-edited book of orchestral excerpts that you would recommend?
I don't really have an answer to that. I mean, I know just from looking at the covers of my old international editions that Gingold had these excerpt books. I don't know actually whether they're good or not. I think particularly for classical repertoire, they're no longer like well-regarded editions. I think just honestly, IMSOP is such a resource for the public domain now, and it's pretty well known what the standard symphonic excerpts are. So, except for a few things like Shostakovich 5 and Copland 3 that are under copyright, all the Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms, Debussy, Rimsky, Strauss, it's all on IMSOP. So, it takes a little bit of work, but I just keep all the standard excerpts on my iPad. So when a student brings them in, if I need to refer to it to demonstrate, it's there. That's really what I would recommend, is make your own little library of excerpts.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. It was great to hear about how much the musicality is coming out in each phrase for your performers. Thank you for all your coaching. I want to say thank you again to the performers today, and thank you everyone who's attended. We appreciate you guys, and we hope to see you as we do more in the future. Thank you everyone so much. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you so much.